Where's Claudia Jones?
Today you will hear from Sarah Woolley, who is the General Secretary of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, from Dr. Clare Holder, who will read part of Claudia's speech to the court that convicted her under the notorious Smith Act, which led to her deportation. Luke Daniels is running late, but I'm hoping he's going to be here, who is the president of the Caribbean Labour Solidarity Organisation, and Mays Riley, who is the chair of the Young Communist League. Again, I hope she's here. Thank you. And finally, to round it up, will be Rob Griffiths, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Britain. We will then lay wreaths to honour Claudia at the end, and I will call people forward if I can until I no longer know who you are. If you've got reason, I'll generally make a call. Firstly, a few words from me. Claudia Jones was a black feminist community activist, a dedicated communist, a journalist, author, an intellectual, and a formidable class warrior. She was born in Trinidad in 1915, and she and her family moved to New York in 1924. Her younger years were marred by the loss of her mother 5 years after they arrived in the US, and the extreme poverty she experienced and extremely poor housing conditions that led to her catching tuberculosis at 17 years old. Claudia joined the Communist Party of the USA and the Young Communist League in 1936 and quickly became recognised for her activism, her feminism, writing and her intellect. She quickly gained leadership positions within a number of organisations, including the National Peace Council and the Women's National Commission of the Communist Party of the USA. She made her main focus the creation of an anti-imperialist coalition managed by working class leadership, fueled by the involvement of women. Claudia was a working class black feminist and asserted that black women were super exploited by being subjected to sexism, racism and classism, later known as intersectionality. And in this, she was well ahead of her time. She argued that the oppression of black women undermined not only the success of the black community, but also of women and the working class in general. Claudia's communism and activism drew the attention of the US government, and she was arrested a number of times during the McCarthyite period. During this time, she was diagnosed with a heart condition, and after a stint in prison in 1951, for un-American activities, whatever they might be, she suffered her first heart attack at 36 years old. That same year, she was tried and convicted with 11 others of un-American activities under the notorious Smith Act. And if you don't know what the Smith Act is, please do look it up. It was an appalling piece of legislation. The charges against her related to an article she had written for the magazine Political Affairs under the title Women in the Struggle for Peace and Security. At the trial, she made a historic speech, some of which you will hear later from when Dr. Clare Holder speaks. The Supreme Court refused to hear their appeal, and in 1955, the Supreme Court refused to hear the appeal, and in 1955, Claudia began her sentence for a year and a day in the Federal Reformatory for Women. She was released on the 23rd of October 1955. She was refused entry to Trinidad and Tobago as the colonial governor, Major General Sir Hubert Elvin Rance, was of the opinion she may prove troublesome. She was eventually offered residency in the United Kingdom on humanitarian grounds. On her arrival in the UK, Claudia immediately joined the Communist Party here, and she went on to play a leading role. She was active in the black community, founding the West Indian Gazette and founding with others the Carnival event in 1959 that led to the annual Notting Hill Carnival that we all know of today. Claudia was plagued by ill health from her poverty-stricken early life and died in 1964 at the age of 49. It was a tragic loss, far too soon, of an extraordinary communist, a pioneering intellectual black woman, and one that the Communist Party is proud to call a comrade. Thank you for listening to me. I now call upon Sarah Woolley, the General Secretary of the BFAWU.
Thanks, Ruth.
You can hold the camera.
Friends, as we remember Claudia Jones today, we must do more than just honour her legacy. We must recognise that the struggles that she fought are the struggles, absolutely the struggles that we are still fighting today, right now. Claudia understood something fundamental.
Today,
as Ruth said, that racism, sexism and class oppression are not separate fights. They are deeply connected, and to take on one, we absolutely must take on them all. That message is just as urgent today with everything that's going on as it was in her time. Claudia fought against the racialised division of labour, where black and migrant workers were pushed into the lowest paid, most insecure jobs. Doesn't that sound familiar? Today, black and ethnic minority workers are still more likely to be on 0 hours contracts, in low-wage sectors and in precarious work. The same inequalities Claudia Jones exposed in the garment industry in the 40s and the 50s are now rampant in care work, hospitality and the gig economy. And when workers organise, whether it was in the garment workers in Claudia's time or Amazon and McDonald's workers today, the response is still the same: intimidation, union busting and victimisation. Claudia Jones was persecuted and deported for her activism. Today, black trade unionists are more likely to face disciplinary action for standing up for their rights, because the system is designed to keep us divided. But Claudia showed us that unity across race and class is our greatest strength. Another clear link is the struggle for equal pay and gender justice. Claudia Jones was clear that women workers face double oppression, as workers and as women. She fought for them to be seen, heard and protected within the labour movement. Today, shamefully, women are still paid less, still undervalued and more likely to be in insecure work. And when we look at the ongoing fight for fair wages in care, cleaning and retail, industries dominated by women, it is clear that Claudia's work is far from done. And let's not forget the weaponisation of immigration status against workers. Claudia Jones fought for the rights of Caribbean workers who were being blamed for economic problems and used as scapegoats for political gain. Today we see the same tactics. Migrant workers are essential to our economy, especially the food industry where our members work. It would not operate without migrant workers, yet they are vilified, exploited and denied basic protections. Anti-union laws and the hostile environment make it even harder for them to fight back. But as Claudia showed us, when we refuse to be divided, we are powerful. So what does that mean for us today? It means that remembering Claudia Jones is not just about history, it is about action. It means fighting for fair pay and secure jobs for all workers, no matter their race, gender or immigration status. It means calling out racism and sexism wherever we see it, but especially in our own movement, as we have to have our own house in order to. It means defending and strengthening our unions against attacks from the government and corporations, and it means standing in solidarity with migrant workers, precarious workers, and all of those on the front lines of exploitation. Claudia Jones taught us that our struggles are connected, and our power is in collective action. She would tell us today, don't just commemorate, but organise. Thank you for the invitation to join me today to honour Claudia and for the opportunity to hear and learn more about this fantastic woman.
Your Honour, I rise because there are a few things I wish to say. For if what I say here serves even one whit to further dedicate growing millions of Americans to fight for peace and to repel the fascist drive on free speech and thought in our country, I shall consider my rising to speak worthwhile indeed. Quite candidly, Your Honour, I say these things not with any idea that what I say will influence your sentencing of me. For even with all your power Your Honour holds, how can you decide to mete out justice for the only act to which I proudly plead guilty? and one, moreover, which by your own prior rulings constitutes no crime, and that is the act of holding communist ideas, of being a member and officer of the Communist Party of the United States, of which I am a proud member. Will you measure, for example, as worthy of 1 year's sentence my passionate adherence to the idea of fighting for full, unequivocal equality for my people, the Negro people, which as a communist, I believe can only be achieved allied to the cause of the working class? Another year for my belief that only under socialism will exploitation of and by man be finally abolished, and the great human and industrial resources of the nation be harnessed for the well-being of the people. Still another year's sentence for my belief that the denial of the exercise of free speech and thought to communists only precedes, as history confirms, the denial of the exercise of these rights to all Americans. My article will not be read by the court because it not only refutes the assertion that the ruling class will ever grant equality to 15 million Negro Americans, but shows that what we are granted is unrequited force and violence, not only in the unpunished and barbaric crime of lynching, but in eating, in everyday existence, in living, in the armed forces, in jails, in the denial of land, in recreation, and yes, even in cemeteries are we denied that equality. It cannot be read by you or America, Your Honor, because it urges American mothers, Negro women, and white women to emulate, one, the peace struggles of their anti-fascist sisters in Latin America, the peace struggles in the new European democracies, the peace struggles in the Soviet Union, in Asia and Africa, the peace struggles to end the bestial Korean War, the peace struggles to stop Operation Killer, the peace struggles to bring our boys home, the peace struggles to reject the militaristic threat to embroil us in a war with China so that their children should not suffer the fate of the Korean babies murdered by napalm bombs or the fate of Hiroshima. One thought pervaded me throughout this trial and pervades me still, and it is this, Your Honor. In the 9.5 months of this trial, millions of children have been born. But today, I speak only of those who live. Will the future of those children, including those of our defendants and even Your Honor's grandchildren, be made more secure by the jailing of 13 men and women communists whose crimes are not criminal acts, but advocacy of ideas? Is this not a tyrannical violation of the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? It was in an American junior high school where I first learned of the great traditions of popular liberty of American history, for which I received the Theodore Roosevelt Award for Good Citizenship. That I have learned to interpret that history and to work to influence its change for the betterment of the people with the indispensable weapon of Marxist-Leninist ideas. That is the real crime you have against me. All other charges, I am innocent. It was here on this soil that I had early experiences which are shared by millions of native-born Negroes, the bitter indignity and humiliation of second-class citizenship, the special status which makes a mockery of our government's prated claims of a free America in a free world for 15 million Negro Americans. It was out of my Jim Crow experiences as a young Negro woman, experiences likewise born of working class poverty that led me in my search of why these things had to be that led me to join the Young Communist League and to choose at the age of 18 the philosophy of my life, the science of Marxism-Leninism, that philosophy that not only rejects racist ideas, but is the antithesis of them all. In this courtroom, there was often flashed before me the dozens of meetings of Negro and white workers in the great auto plants at the Rouge, of New England textile workers, of students, and of women active in the peace struggle, which I have addressed on behalf of my party. Just as now, there flashes in my mind's eye these young Negro women I have seen at the Women's House of Detention. They were almost children, of whom, but for my early discovery of Marxism-Leninism, I might have had to say, there might I have been. And for what crimes are they there? Petty crimes born of poverty, of the ghetto, of Jim Crow living, the crime of being born black on American soil, of resisting treatment, rebellion against which, unchanneled, became lawless against the very Jim Crow society that perpetrates their lawlessness. One need only be a Negro in America to know that for the crime of being a Negro, we are daily convicted by a government which denies us elementary democratic rights, the right to vote, the right to hold office, to hold judgeships, to serve on juries, rights forcibly denied in the South and also in the North. It was the great Frederick Douglass, who had a price on his head at the time, but who said, without struggle, there is no progress. If, out of this struggle, history assesses that I and my co-defendants have made some small contribution, I can consider my role small and well worth it. The glorious exploits of anti-fascist heroes and heroines honored today in all lands for their contribution to social progress will, just like the role of our prosecutors, also be measured by the people of the United States in that coming day. I have no more to say, Your Honor. I conclude.
Thank you, Claire, for that superb rendition of Claudia's speech. And I absolutely agree with you. She was a very strong woman and one we must never forget. I'd like to call upon Luke Daniels, the president of the Caribbean Labour Solidarity Organisation, to address us.
Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone. My prepared speech, I'm afraid I ran out and left because of the Zoom meeting I just watched from. But just as well, I think the speakers here have covered almost everything I wanted to say, and much better than I could have done. But I wanted to reflect that CLS has had a long association with Claudia Jones, and I'll explain that in a little moment. But for me, she is one of the most remarkable activists, organizers, feminists, humanists, communists, you name it. She's just been truly amazing. Born in Trinidad, she left Trinidad at an early age, but I think those years that she spent in Trinidad were very important to her development. As most psychologists would tell you, the first 5 years of a child's existence are pretty important as to how they will relate to the world. She grew up with love and care around her. When she moved to the United States, to New York, age 9, she was well fortified. She was ready to deal with the challenges of racism. Nobody could, in any way, convince her that she was lesser than them. And it's not surprising that she became such a fighter, joining the communists, young communists at the age 18. It was a remarkable thing for a young black woman to be doing in the US at a time when communists were under such pressure. I think she's pretty brave. She lived with poverty in New York You know, she saw her mother work to death at age 37. It affected her deeply. Her father stepped up to the plate, and we must remember, because many fathers do not step up in the way he did to care for his siblings, for her siblings and her. And he had such confidence in her, so much so that when she was leaving New York, she more or less assured people not to worry. Wherever Claudia goes, she will do her best. He had that confidence. She moved to London, and she was greeted and met with people who admired and loved her and who tried to get her established here in the UK in the most remarkable way. We must remember Amy Garvey, Paul Prescott, the people who stepped up, the Communist Party, and also the Caribbean Labour Congress. Why I said we've had a long association is because when you look at the members of the Caribbean Labour Congress, they're all founder members of Caribbean Labour Solidarity. Lionel Jeffrey, Preston Taylor, Billy Strachan, also, who am I missing out? There was a few others, but they were, part of CLS, so we feel we are connected to Claudia in a way. And so all I will say now is happy birthday to Claudia. Viva Claudia Jones. Thank you. Viva!
Thank you, Luke. And a bit of an interesting lesson and information about Caribbean Labour Solidarity. And if you're not in touch with them, make sure you get in touch. Thank you very much, Luke. I now call upon Maze Riley, Chair of the Young Communist League of Britain, to come and address us. Here you go.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here today, comrades. We come together to honour Claudia Jones, a tireless fighter for the working class, for women, for black liberation and for socialism. As we mark the 110th anniversary of her birth, we do so not just in remembrance, but in recognition of the struggles she fought, the battles she won, and the work that remains unfinished. Claudia Jones understood that youth and women were at the heart of revolutionary change. She was only 21 when she joined the Communist Party, and from that moment, she dedicated her life to organising young workers, particularly young black women, against capitalism, imperialism and oppression. She saw long before many others that black women faced a triple burden, oppressed as workers, as women and as black people. But she also knew that this very position gave her the immense revolutionary potential. Her work has had a lasting impact upon communists and feminists that remains relevant today. She spoke not just of struggle, but of unity. She showed that liberation was not a separate battle for different sections of the working class. It was one fight. The fight of black and white workers. The fight of men and women. The fight of young and old. She called on the fight for socialism that could bring true equality and freedom to working and oppressed people. And she never gave up. Not when the US government persecuted her, not when she was imprisoned for her communist beliefs, not when she was deported. She arrived in Britain and did what she'd always done, organised. Immediately joining the Communist Party of Great Britain, she also built the West Indian Gazette, and she led the fight against racist immigration laws. She laid the foundations for what became Notting Hill Carnival, correctly identifying culture as a key battleground for communists against the ruling class. Even as illness took its toll, she never stopped organising and writing some of her most important work, including articles against the racist Commonwealth Immigrants Act. Today, we must carry forward Claudia's legacy. Working class young people were under attack, through low wages, through job insecurity, through racist policing, attacks on our right to protest, and the strangulation of our education and our future. And women, especially working class and black women, still bear the brunt of super exploitation and oppression today. Capitalism has not changed its nature, nor will it ever. It still relies on dividing and exploiting us to keep us from the fight for socialism. Let's take inspiration from Claudia Jones, not just in words, but in action. Let's build the struggles for socialism, for a world free of exploitation, oppression and war. The battle must be won in our workplaces, campuses and our communities. Therefore, the work that young and working people do in our trade unions, the anti-racist struggle and in the fight for peace and socialism is ever more important. Because, as Claudia reminded us, the fight for peace, for equality, for socialism, is the fight for the best interests of the working class. Comrades, let's build a class struggle in Britain for peace, jobs and socialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. I'd now like to call on Rob Griffiths, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, to come and address us.
Thanks, comrades and friends. You might be a little disappointed to know that not all of my prepared speech has already been spoken by the previous speakers in their excellent contributions. But in particular, in 1951, she was, as has already been mentioned, one of 13 defendants facing charges under the Smith Act, and to be more precise, the primary crime under the Smith Act was to seek to overthrow or destroy the United States federal government by force or violence. I'm quoting directly from the Act itself. And in seeking to prove that this was indeed what Claudia Jones had been trying to do, in the course of the trial, the prosecution cited at some length and on a number of occasions a speech that she'd actually delivered the year before on International Women's Day in 1950. And I thought it would be therefore quite interesting to have a look at that speech and to see what we can find there of her advocating the violent overthrow or destruction of the United States government. Of course, she wanted the overthrow and the destruction of the United States government and of the capitalist system itself, but had she advocated the use of violence in particular to achieve that aim, because that is what the Smith Act requires as proof? Well, the main theme of the article, of her speech, which was later reprinted in that CPUSA magazine that Ruth mentioned in her introduction, Political Affairs, more than anything else, what she was doing was linking the struggles for women's liberation, for black emancipation, and for international peace. And in doing that, she emphasized a number of key aspects. Firstly, the role of women, and in particular the role of women workers, in united front campaigns that were then taking place against the United States development of the H-bomb. And of course, anybody familiar with the so-called arms race will know that at every stage it was the United States that was driving forward the arms race. And so a major theme of her speech and the article was against US development of the H-bomb and the demand that the United States should respond, if only to sit down and talk with the Soviet Union about the Soviet Union's many initiatives and proposals for nuclear disarmament and international peace, something which, of course, the United States refused to do for much of the 1950s. At the time that she made that speech on International Women's Day, there were already mass campaigns, meetings, marches, appeals, petitions, and in particular, she made reference to some of the biggest campaigns that were in the German Democratic Republic, Italy, France, and China, and the holding of an all-Asian women's conference that had also mobilized huge numbers of people in support of international peace and nuclear disarmament. In that article, of course, she puts the case, and that speech, she puts the case against United States imperialism. She explains that this is what the Marshall Plan in Western Europe was all about, to rebuild the war-shattered economies of Western Europe, but to do it in a way that would firstly open the doors to American multinational corporations, and secondly would land Britain and other countries in enormous debt to the United States for the money that would be borrowed, and which we then spent the next 40 or 50 years actually repaying. She also talks about US support for the Spanish fascist government. She talks about the US involvement in the bombing of workers, the shelling of workers and communists in Greece in order to preserve the Greek pro-fascist monarchy. She also deals with the surrender of social democracy and Labour leaders, with, of course, always honourable exceptions, but the surrender of social democracy and Labour leaders to imperialism and to what she called the Wall Street, she called them the Wall Street puppets, surrendering to NATO and to its agenda of rearmament. Don't forget, when she made this speech in 1950, Western countries, including Britain, were embarking on the biggest program of rearmament for more than a decade. Britain almost trebled its expenditure on weapons in just a couple of years. That's what caused Aneurin Bevan to resign as health minister from the Labour government, and the cuts in public spending and public services that were necessary to pay for that rearmament, that played a major role in Labour losing the 1951 general election, even though it had won that massive majority in 1945. Some of this may sound a little familiar to you as a scenario that might be unfolding. Also in that speech, and as evidence before the court, she pointed out the dangers of anti-communism. Many people, of course, in the Labour movement are not communists, they're not Communist Party members, they don't agree with quite a few things, in some cases with many things that communists say and do. But to surrender to the anti-communist hysteria that was then gripping the United States, and we'd had a milder version of it in Britain, is actually a surrender to not just anti-communism, but to anti-socialism, to progress of any kind. And too many surrender all too easily to that. And then finally, she pointed out the essential need for unity between women and men workers, at the same time recognizing there were real problems of male chauvinism in the Labour movement that had to be confronted. She also, by the way, criticized bourgeois feminism that saw men as the main enemy and not capitalism. She talked about the need for unity between black and white workers as an essential precondition to making progress, let alone to taking on monopoly capital. So this was the substance of that International Women's Day speech that was probably the main item of evidence presented against her as part of that trial of the leading communists. In other articles, by the way, in Political Affairs, they're available on the internet. I think we should have a look, together with other organisations, at publishing some of the articles and speeches of Claudia Jones from that period. There are some remarkable echoes that we have with us today. But elsewhere, she denounced President Truman. We might think that Donald Trump is the first criminally insane president of the United States. In some ways, he's still a pale shadow of President Truman. She condemned his criminal crusade of force and violence against the vast majority of the human race. Though demagogically prating about peace, he glorifies Wall Street's aggressive expansionism, now flagrantly directed against the coloured peoples of Asia and Africa. And he proposes an unrestrained armaments race. This is not somebody about Trump today. This is Claudia Jones about President Truman in 1950. She said, "There's no such thing as arming for peace. You can't saber rattle for peace." And therefore she was opposing this huge program of rearmament that was being proposed in the West, to be led, of course, by NATO. And how often do we hear today any voices raised in the Labour movement or even on the left against NATO? It's an article of faith that NATO has kept the peace in Europe, that NATO was set up in order to keep the peace in Europe and elsewhere. Even the most cursory look at history will show you what complete and utter nonsense that's always been. Not only involving, of course, the rearmament of West Germany, with many fascist functionaries still in place in the state apparatus and the armed forces, but even admitting fascist Spain into membership of NATO and the Greek military dictatorship. So Claudia Jones made the case for freedom, but she said, where's the freedom when we see this persecution of communists and socialists? Where's the freedom where we see the lynching of black people and where we see the routine oppression and super exploitation of black women? And she also attacked the idea that there was this strange creature called the American way of life. It's closely related, I believe, to the idea of Western values that we hear so much about today. She mocked that as well. She said, well, of course, all this was just verbiage to hide the systematic looting of the working people of the United States and other Western countries. And she made the case very strongly, makes the case very strongly in a whole number of articles against NATO, against the Korean War, against United States support for Chiang Kai-shek, the exiled dictator who had taken refuge in Formosa, now Taiwan. And we better bear that in mind, because that issue is still with us. We still have a host of Guardian readers that apparently can't wait to have a war with China over the future of Taiwan. Taiwan is as Chinese as the Isle of Wight is English. And however much some of you might like to get rid of the Isle of Wight, nevertheless, the idea that any Western country should go to war over the future of Taiwan is completely ludicrous, and yet it is seriously argued, and not just in The Guardian. It's argued in all kinds of journals, it's argued in some of our major political parties and so on. She also emphasized the unique position that black people in the United States and other countries have, the unique role they can play in the struggle against imperialism and capitalism, because so many of them originated from the countries that have been the victims of imperialism over the centuries. I'll just finish with a direct quote. This is what Claudia Jones actually said a few years after her deportation to the United Kingdom in 1955. And it explains not only the deportation, it explains really what motivated and what drove Claudia Jones for the whole of her adult life. I was deported, she said, from the USA as a Negro woman communist of West Indian descent. I was a thorn in their side in my opposition to Jim Crow racist discrimination against 16 million Negro Americans. My work for redress of these grievances, for unity of Negro and white workers, for women's rights, because I fought for peace, because I urged the prosecution of lynchers rather than the prosecution of communists and other democratic Americans who opposed the lynchers and opposed the big financiers and warmongers, the real advocates of force and violence in the United States. The real advocates still today, of course, of force and violence anywhere in the world where they think they'll be able to achieve their objectives. So, comrades, we should all be proud to be here by the grave of Claudia Jones. We should all be proud to march in her footsteps. Long live the struggle for black liberation. Long live the struggle for women's liberation. Long live the struggle for socialism against capitalism and imperialism.
Thank you, Rob. the representative from the Cuban embassy, if they'd like to come forward and lay a tribute. The representative from the Trinidad embassy, if they are here, if they'd like to lay a floral tribute. No, they don't have one. I don't know if Sarah would like to lay a tribute. No. GFTU, come forward, please. Would the YCL like to come forward and lay a tribute? And the Communist Party, would they like to come and lay a tribute to Claudia? If anybody else wishes to lay a floral tribute, please come forward. Oh, sorry, the Caribbean Labour Solidarity Organisation, I forgot. Sorry, Luke.
Resting next to Mark's to be later.
A very good place to rest. If there's anybody else who would like to lay a floral tribute, please feel free to come forward and lay these. So I'd like to thank you all again for coming to this event, and I hope you all keep coming to this event. But more importantly, I hope you will research Claudia's writings and also heed her call to action. We'll be assembling at Brendan the Navigator on Highgate Hill after this event, so if anybody would like to join us, you're very welcome. Thank you, comrades.